Michael often joked that he had two jobs, one that paid him, and one that drained him. The paid one was his grueling shift as a delivery driver, bouncing from one end of the city to the other, wrestling traffic and deadlines just to make enough to cover rent and groceries. The second was raising his daughter alone, something he carried with equal parts pride and exhaustion. Since Emma's mother had passed away, the tiny apartment felt heavier, as though the air itself reminded him daily of what was missing. For Michael, survival came first. Every dollar had a destination, every moment a purpose. Chess, he thought, was none of those things. It was a distraction, a luxury they couldn't afford. When he caught Emma hunched over the scratched wooden chessboard she had found at a thrift store, he saw wasted time, hours she could have spent on math homework or chores. "You're not going to get anywhere moving little toys around a board," he said one night, irritation leaking into his voice. Emma didn't argue. She just glanced up with those wide brown eyes that always made him feel like the villain in his own story. Then, silently, she turned back to the board, her fingers lightly resting on a pawn as if it were a secret she couldn't share. But Michael couldn't help noticing the intensity in her face. While other kids her age got distracted by TV shows or their phones, Emma sat in complete focus, scribbling moves into an old notebook with a pencil chewed down to the nub. He would sometimes hear her muttering under her breath, reciting names he barely understood: Sicilian Defense, Queen's Gambit, Caro Kann. It frustrated him, but it also unsettled him. Where had she learned all this? Who was teaching her? The truth was, no one was. Emma had become her own teacher. She borrowed chess books from the library, watched old matches online at the public computer lab, and practiced against herself when Michael was too tired to notice. The game became her refuge, a world where her mother's absence didn't ache as much, where every piece had a role and every move had meaning. Unlike the chaos of real life, chess made sense. It followed rules that couldn't be bent by grief or poverty. Still, Michael hardened himself against it. He remembered how many dreams had died in his own youth. He had wanted to study music once, back before bills and responsibility pressed him flat. He feared Emma was setting herself up for the same heartbreak. It was easier, he thought, to stop her now than to watch her fall later. "Books and grades will get you somewhere," he muttered one evening as she carefully reset the board. "Chess won't put food on the table." Emma didn't answer, but the way her shoulders squared told him she had heard every word. What Michael didn't know then was that she had already made up her mind. No amount of discouragement could extinguish the quiet fire inside her. The rain started before dawn, steady and unrelenting, drumming against the apartment's thin windows as if trying to drown out the world outside. Michael had hoped the weather would be excuse enough to cancel the trip. He pictured wet sidewalks, cold wind, and buses running late. But Emma was already up, hair tied back, her old sweater pulled tight, clutching the battered chessboard against her chest like it was a treasure chest. "Please, Dad," she said softly, standing by the door. Her eyes were expectant, her cheeks flushed with anticipation. Michael rubbed his temples, caught between wanting to protect her and wanting to avoid another argument. He thought of all the reasons to say no. The tournament would be full of polished kids from better schools, children whose parents could afford tutors and glossy tournament sets. Emma would be the odd one out. He didn't want to see her humiliated, not after everything she had already endured losing her mother so young. But something in her determination unsettled him. It wasn't whining or begging, it was resolve. He saw her mother's stubbornness alive in her posture, and that memory alone made him falter. "Fine," he sighed at last, pulling on his worn jacket. "But don't expect miracles." The bus smelled faintly of damp coats and engine oil, its windows fogging as it rattled through puddled streets. Emma sat by the window, nose almost touching the glass, whispering softly to herself. Michael leaned closer and realized she wasn't talking nonsense, she was rehearsing. "Pawn to e4, knight to f3, bishop c4, she murmured, as if practicing choreography for a performance only she could see. Michael slouched back, watching her from the corner of his eye. Part of him wanted to laugh at the seriousness on her small face, but another part of him, one he didn't like to admit existed, felt a pang of awe. How could a child so young carry herself with such focus? It reminded him of the way her mother used to rehearse songs late into the night, determined to get every note perfect. That same flame was flickering in Emma now. Still, The doubts weighed heavy. He imagined her sitting across from some private school prodigy, fumbling and failing, the crowd whispering behind their hands. He imagined the look in her eyes if she lost. Disappointment, shame, maybe even resentment toward him for letting her try. Wouldn't it be kinder to have stopped her? To spare her the fall? The thought twisted in his chest, making him restless. Emma turned suddenly, as if sensing his unease. "Dad," she whispered, "I don't care if I lose. I just want to try." The words disarmed him. He had braced himself for her to talk about winning, about trophies, about proving herself. But she wasn't asking for glory. She was asking for a chance. For a moment, Michael looked at her and saw not a little girl, but someone braver than he had ever been. The atrium of the building was unlike anything Emma had ever stepped into. Light poured through a towering glass ceiling, spilling across polished marble floors that gleamed like water. The storm outside seemed far away here, replaced by the hum of voices and the occasional clatter of chess pieces being set into place. Dozens of children milled about, their parents adjusting ties and smoothing dresses, whispering last-minute advice. Sleek boards and pristine timers lined the tables, their wooden surfaces shining as if they'd never been touched. Emma clutched her own chess set, a second-hand board with one chipped rook and pawns that didn't quite match in color. She knew how out of place it looked. She knew, too, that her sweater with a fraying cuff didn't match the pressed uniforms and crisp jackets of the other players. But instead of shrinking back, she drew herself taller, her chin lifted in a quiet defiance. Michael, standing a few steps behind her, noticed this with a pang. How could she walk into this place with more courage than he felt just watching? A hush fell over the crowd as an announcer introduced the highlight of the opening round. One lucky participant would face the company's CEO. Emma's name was called. Michael's heart nearly stopped. Of all the children, why her? He imagined her freezing under the gaze of the crowd, crumbling when her opponent was not just any player but the most important man in the room. Emma moved without hesitation. She carried her board under one arm and stepped toward the table, her small figure swallowed by the grandeur of the space. The CEO stood waiting, tall and distinguished, his silver hair perfectly combed, his suit immaculate. He smiled warmly as she approached, clearly expecting nothing more than a ceremonial. "Game. Hello, Emma," he said kindly, extending his hand. She shook it firmly, surprising him with her grip. They sat across from each other, and an official placed a digital clock beside the board. Cameras clicked, reporters leaned forward, and the room seemed to tighten around their table. Michael hovered near the back, unable to sit still. He wanted to protect her, to snatch her away before she embarrassed herself, but it was too late. The CEO gestured to her politely. "White moves first." Emma lifted her pawn and advanced it to e4. The motion was small, almost delicate, but her certainty was unmistakable. The CEO responded casually, "Knight to c6. Emma's next move was knight to f3, precise and deliberate. Bishop c4 followed, a sharp, aggressive opening. Gasps rose from the crowd as Emma's strategy revealed itself, cornering his queen in a way no one had expected. The CEO froze, his confident demeanor slipping. Then something extraordinary happened. His face softened, his eyes misting over as he stared at the familiar sequence unfolding. That was my late daughter's favorite opening," he whispered, barely audible. He pressed his palms to his face, the room hushed. He moved his king into a corner, silently conceding. Emma, calm and almost shy, had not only outmaneuvered him on the board but had touched a heart that had long carried grief. The CEO addressed the crowd. "Talent is everywhere. It only needs a chance to be seen." He smiled at Emma and turned to Michael. "I would be honored to support her training." Michael swallowed hard, realizing that protecting her didn't mean stopping her. It meant trusting her to navigate the world, giving her the chance to shine. As they left the building, umbrellas dripping rainwater onto the sidewalk, Michael let Emma lead the way. He carried the chessboard carefully, aware it was no longer just a game. It was a symbol of her courage, her ingenuity, and the unexpected, beautiful ways she could touch the world.